November 1443. 300 Albanian cavalry are completely surrounded. Behind them, the entire Ottoman army. In front of them, certain death. And this man, Gjergj Kastrioti, is about to commit the greatest betrayal in military history. Here's the insane part. He was trained by the Ottomans, raised by them. For 20 years he was one of them. So what changed? This is the story of how one general held back the most powerful empire on earth for 25 years. Not with a massive army, not with modern weapons, with 8,000 mountain fighters and tactics so brilliant that military academies still study them today. His name is Skanderbeg, and the Ottomans were so terrified of him that even after his death, they opened his tomb and stole his bones, believing they held supernatural power. But this doesn't start as a rebellion, it starts as a tragedy, with a father, an impossible choice, and 4 boys who will never see home again. The year is 1423. In the fortress of Kruje, high in the Albanian mountains, a father stands before Ottoman envoys with his 4 sons. Gjergj Kastrioti, Lord of Central Albania, has received the Sultan's message, and it's brutally clear. Surrender your sons as hostages, or watch your lands burn. This is the devshirme, the blood tax, the Ottoman practice of taking Christian boys to be converted to Islam and trained as soldiers or administrators. For most families, losing a son this way means never seeing him again. For John, it means losing everything: his legacy, his bloodline, his future. His youngest son, Gjergj, is only 9 years old. The boy watches his father's face harden as the decision is made. There is no choice, not really. The Kastrioti family has ruled these mountains for generations, but now their bloodline will serve the very empire that threatens to destroy them. Gjergj and his brothers are taken to Edirne, the Ottoman capital, hundreds of miles from the mountain air of their homeland. The boy from the Albanian highlands is about to enter a world that will transform him into something neither his father nor the Sultan could have anticipated. Inside the Ottoman court, young Gjergj discovers a world of calculated brutality and sophisticated military science. The palace at Edirne isn't just a seat of power, it's a factory for creating the empire's future leaders. The boys taken in the devshirme aren't simply slaves. They're being molded into the Sultan's Gjergj is given a new name, Iskander, after Alexander the Great. With the Turkish honorific bey added, he becomes Skanderbeg, the name that will echo through centuries. And the boy proves exceptional. While other hostages struggle with the transition, Skanderbeg absorbs everything. He learns Ottoman Turkish, Persian and Arabic. He studies the Quran and converts to Islam, at least outward. But more importantly, he learns war. The Ottoman military system is the most advanced in the world. Skanderbeg learns how to command cavalry, how to deploy infantry, how to use artillery, the revolutionary technology changing warfare forever. He studies siege tactics, supply logistics, battlefield strategy. By his early 20s, he's commanding Ottoman troops in battle. And he's brilliant at it. The Ottomans send him everywhere: Anatolia, the Balkans, across the expanding frontiers of the empire. He distinguishes himself in battle after battle. Sultan Murad II himself takes notice of this young commander who seems to understand warfare with almost. Skanderbeg is given command of 5,000 cavalry, an extraordinary honor. He fights in Ottoman campaigns in Hungary, in Serbia, in Wallachia. He sees firsthand how the Ottoman war machine operates, how it conquers, how it holds territory. And crucially, he learns its weaknesses. But during all this time, he hasn't forgotten the mountains of Albania. He hasn't forgotten his father's face as he surrendered his sons. He hasn't forgotten who he was before he became Iskander Bey. In the camps between battles, he meets other Albanians serving in the Ottoman army. They speak in whispers about the old days, about the land they came from, about the faith they were forced to abandon. Skanderbeg listens, and he remembers, and he plans. The moment comes in 1443. Sultan Murad assembles a massive army to crush a Hungarian-Polish coalition threatening Ottoman dominance in the Balkans. This is a critical campaign. If the Skanderbeg is given command of a significant force and ordered to fight alongside the main Ottoman army. The two forces meet near the city of Niš. The fighting is brutal, confused, a massive clash of cavalry and infantry across broken terrain. The Ottomans expect victory, but the battle goes badly. The Hungarian forces, led by John Hunyadi, fight with unexpected ferocity. The Ottoman lines begin to waver, and in the chaos, Skanderbeg makes his choice. He's been planning this for months, maybe years. He's quietly contacted other Albanians. Now, as the battle rages, Skanderbeg and 300 Albanian cavalry suddenly wheel their horses and break away from the Ottoman lines. They don't flee in panic. This is calculated, precise, the beginning of a plan. Skanderbeg leads his men away from the battlefield at full gallop, heading west, toward the mountains he left 20 years ago. But Skanderbeg knows desertion isn't enough. To return to Albania and raise a rebellion, he needs legitimacy, he needs a foothold, he needs to move faster than the Ottoman response. As his 300 riders race across the Serbian countryside, Skanderbeg executes the first part of his plan. Traveling with the Ottoman army is the Sultan's secretary, a man who carries the imperial seal and has authority to write orders in the Sultan's name. Skanderbeg's men capture this official. Under extreme duress, the secretary writes a document ordering the Ottoman governor of Kruje to surrender the fortress to Skanderbeg. The seal is authentic, the handwriting is genuine, it's perfect. When Skanderbeg arrives at the gates of Kruje, the fortress where he was born, he presents these orders. The Ottoman garrison commander reads the Sultan's seal and believes he has no choice but to obey. The gates open. Skanderbeg and his men ride inside. And the moment the last of his cavalry enters, they turn on the Ottoman garrison. The fighting is swift and merciless. Skanderbeg's men have surprise and desperation. Within hours, every Ottoman soldier in Kruje is dead. The fortress, the symbol of Kastrioti power. Skanderbeg stands on the walls of his father's castle and looks out over the mountains. He's 38 years old. He's home. And he's about to start a war that will last 25 years. November 1443 marks the beginning, but holding one fortress means nothing if he can't unite the fractured Albanian nobility. Albania isn't a unified nation. It's a patchwork of rival clans, each with their own territories, armies, ambitions. These lords have spent generations fighting each other as much as foreign invaders. Many have made their own deals with the Ottomans, paying tribute in exchange for being left alone. Skanderbeg needs to convince these proud, suspicious men to risk everything in a war against the most powerful empire in the world. He sends messengers to every Albanian nobleman calling for a council in the city of Lecce. The response is mixed. Some come out of curiosity, some because they remember the Kastrioti name, some because they hate the Ottomans and see a chance, however slim, for freedom. In March of 1444, the Albanian lords gather, and what happens there changes everything. Skanderbeg addresses the assembled nobles with a speech that witnesses later describe as electrifying. He doesn't appeal to greed or promise easy victory. He speaks to their honor, their faith, their hatred of subjugation. He reminds them of what they've lost. Churches converted to mosques, sons taken in the Devshirme, tribute paid in gold and blood. He tells them he fought for the Sultan for 20 years, that he knows the Ottoman army intimately, that he knows they can be beaten. He doesn't claim the fight will be easy. He promises only that if they stand together, they can make the Ottomans pay in blood for every inch of Albanian soil. The speech works. One by one, the Albanian lords pledge their support. They form the League of Lecce, a military alliance with Skanderbeg as supreme commander. The League controls an army of approximately 8,000 men, mostly light cavalry and mountain infantry. It's tiny compared to the armies the Ottomans can field, but it's mobile, and it's led by a commander who understands Ottoman tactics better than almost anyone alive. Skanderbeg also makes a symbolic gesture that resonates across Albania. He publicly converts back to Christianity, taking communion in the Cathedral of Lecce. The message is clear. This is a holy war to reclaim the faith and freedom stolen by conquest. The Ottomans don't take long to respond. When news reaches Sultan Murad that Skanderbeg has seized Kruje and is rallying the Albanians, the Sultan is reportedly furious. Skanderbeg was one of his most trusted commanders, a man he personally elevated and honored. This betrayal isn't just a military problem, it's a humiliation. Murad sends an army of approximately 25,000 men under Ali Pasha with orders to crush the rebellion quickly and bring Skanderbeg's head back to Edirne. The Ottoman force marches into Albania in spring 1444, expecting to sweep aside any resistance and lay siege to Kruje. They're marching into terrain they don't understand, against an enemy who knows every mountain pass, every valley, every place where an army can be ambushed. Skanderbeg doesn't meet them in open battle. Instead, he uses the mountains themselves as a weapon. The first major engagement occurs near the town of Torvioll in June 1444. This battle establishes the pattern that will define the entire rebellion. Ali Pasha's 25,000 men are strung out along mountain roads, moving in column formation because the terrain doesn't allow anything else. Skanderbeg has positioned his 8,000 men on high ground overlooking the Ottoman line of march. His soldiers carry swords, spears, crossbows. Many wield the yatagan, a curved Albanian sword particularly effective in close combat. Skanderbeg waits until the Ottoman column is fully committed to the narrow pass, until they can't easily retreat or deploy into battle formation. Then he attacks. The Albanian forces come down from the heights in a coordinated assault that hits the Ottomans from multiple directions. The effect is devastating. Ottoman cavalry, their primary offensive weapon in open battle, is nearly useless in the confined space. They can't charge, can't maneuver, can't bring their superior numbers to bear. The fighting becomes brutal, close-quarters combat where the Albanians' knowledge of terrain gives them the advantage. Ali Pasha tries desperately to organize a defense, to get his men into some kind of formation. But the ambush has created chaos. Units are separated from commanders. The column fragments into isolated groups fighting for survival. Skanderbeg himself leads the main assault, fighting at the head of his cavalry. Witnesses describe him wielding a two-handed sword with devastating effect, personally killing multiple. This isn't a general who commands from the rear. Skanderbeg leads from the front, and his men fight with fury. The Battle of Torvioll lasts most of the day. By evening, the Ottoman force is shattered. Ali Pasha retreats with remnants of his army, having lost perhaps 8,000 men killed or captured. The Albanians lost fewer than 1,000. News of the victory spreads like wildfire across the Balkans. The invincible Ottoman army has been decisively beaten by a numerically inferior force of mountain rebels. For the first time in decades, it seems possible that the Ottoman advance can be stopped. Sultan Murad cannot allow this defeat to stand. In 1445, he sends an even larger army, 40,000 strong, under Firuz Pasha, with orders to destroy Skanderbeg and occupy Albania permanently. The Ottomans have learned from Torvioll. This time they advance cautiously, sending scouts ahead, avoiding obvious ambush points. Firuz Pasha is a skilled commander who understands he's facing an enemy. The two armies maneuver around each other for weeks. Skanderbeg refuses to commit to major battle until conditions are right. Firuz tries to force a confrontation on favorable ground. The contest becomes a test of patience and nerve. Finally, in September 1445, Skanderbeg chooses his ground. He positions his forces on high ground, commanding a valley the Ottoman army must cross to reach Kruje. Firuz, eager to bring the elusive Albanians to battle, takes the bait. The Battle of Mokra demonstrates Skanderbeg's evolution as a commander. He's arranged his forces in depth, infantry holding high ground, cavalry hidden in woods on both flanks. The Ottomans advance across the valley in standard formation, heavy cavalry in center, infantry on wings, archers in support. As they climb the slope toward the Albanian position, Skanderbeg's infantry opens fire with crossbows and arquebuses, early firearms just beginning to appear in Europe. The range is close enough that bolts and bullets strike with terrible effect. The Ottomans press forward, absorbing casualties, determined to close and use superior numbers. Just as the Ottoman center commits fully to the assault, Skanderbeg springs his trap. Albanian cavalry bursts from the woods on both flanks, hitting the Ottoman wings simultaneously. The timing is perfect. Ottoman forces are caught in a converging attack, pressed from the front by infantry, slammed from the sides by cavalry. The formation collapses. What was an organized assault becomes a panicked retreat as the Ottomans realize they're being surrounded. Firuz Pasha tries to rally his men, but momentum is with the Albanians. Skanderbeg's cavalry drives deep into Ottoman ranks, splitting their army into fragments. The fighting is savage. Albanian warriors wielding yatakans and spears clash with Ottoman Sipahi cavalry in swirling combat across the valley floor. The battle becomes a slaughter. Firuz Pasha himself is killed in the fighting, cut down trying to hold together the crumbling center of his army. By nightfall, the Ottoman force has ceased to exist as a coherent military unit. Bodies cover the valley. Skanderbeg's men pursue fleeing Ottomans for miles, cutting down stragglers. The Albanians capture enormous quantities of weapons, armor, horses. More importantly, they've proven that Torvioll wasn't a fluke. Skanderbeg can beat the Ottomans in open battle through superior tactics and the fighting spirit of his men. The news reaches Constantinople and sends shockwaves through the Ottoman court. The Sultan has lost 2 major armies in 2 years to a rebel force that should have been crushed in weeks. Over the next several years, Skanderbeg consolidates control over Albania. He fortifies key positions, strengthens the defenses of Kruje, trains his army in tactics he learned in Ottoman service. But he also, no matter how many times he defeats Ottoman armies in the field, he can't win a long war of attrition against an empire with vastly greater resources. He needs allies beyond Albania's borders. Skanderbeg sends envoys to Venice, to the Papal States, to the Kingdom of Naples, to Hungary. He presents himself not just as an Albanian rebel, but as the defender of Christian Europe against Islamic conquest. This is brilliant propaganda. The Ottoman threat terrifies Western Europe, but most European powers are too distant or divided to mount effective resistance. Skanderbeg offers them a success story. Proof. Pope Eugene IV declares Skanderbeg the athlete of Christ and calls for a crusade to support him. Venice provides supplies and limited financial support, though the Venetians are too focused on commercial interests to commit fully. The support helps, but it's never enough. Skanderbeg is essentially fighting alone. In 1448, the Ottomans try Unable to defeat Skanderbeg in battle, Sultan Murad attempts to assassinate him. Ottoman agents infiltrate Albania with orders to kill the rebel leader by any means necessary. Several attempts are made over the year. A plot to poison Skanderbeg at a feast, an ambush while traveling between fortresses. Skanderbeg develops a network of informers and maintains a personal guard of trusted warriors who never leave his side. The assassination attempts, when they become known, only increase Skanderbeg's legend. He's not just a great general, he's a man whom God protects, a hero whom no treachery can destroy. Stories spread of of assassins struck down by divine intervention, of Skanderbeg's preternatural ability to sense danger. Whether these stories are true or embellished, they serve a purpose. They make Skanderbeg larger than life. For the Albanian fighters, many illiterate peasants and mountain clansmen fighting for Skanderbeg becomes a holy. In 1450, Sultan Murad dies and is succeeded by his son, Mehmed II. Mehmed is young, ambitious, determined to eclipse his father's achievements. Within 3 years, he'll capture Constantinople and bring the Byzantine Empire to its final end. But before he can focus on Constantinople, he decides to settle the problem of Albania. In 1450, Mehmed sends a massive army to Albania. Estimates range from 60,000 to 100,000 men, the largest Ottoman force yet deployed against Skanderbeg. This army isn't just infantry and cavalry, it includes a substantial artillery train. The same siege guns Mehmed will later use to batter down the walls of Constantinople. The Ottomans are done trying to fight Skanderbeg in the mountains. This time they're going directly for Kruje. If they can take the fortress, the symbol of Skanderbeg's power, the rebellion will collapse. The siege of Kruje begins in May 1450 and lasts 5 months. The Ottoman army surrounds the fortress and begins systematic bombardment with artillery. The guns are massive. Cast bronze cannons firing stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds. Each shot shakes the earth and sends fragments of stone flying from fortress walls. Inside Kruje, the garrison numbers only about 4,000 men, a mix of professional soldiers and armed townspeople. They're commanded by Vrana Conti, one of Skanderbeg's most trusted lieutenants. Skanderbeg himself isn't in the fortress when the siege begins. He's outside with the main Albanian field army, approximately 8,000 men, harassing Ottoman supply lines and preventing them from establishing a secure perimeter around Kruje. The siege becomes a brutal contest of endurance. Day after day, defenders repair damage each night, using earth, timber, rubble to shore up breaches. The Ottomans attempt direct assaults, sending waves of infantry against walls with ladders and siege towers. Each assault is repelled with heavy casualties. Defenders pour boiling oil and water on attackers, engage in hand-to-hand combat when Ottomans reach the top of walls. Outside the fortress, Skanderbeg wages a different kind of war. He can't directly assault the Ottoman siege lines with his smaller army, but he can make the siege as costly and difficult as possible. His cavalry raids Ottoman supply convoys coming from the east, capturing or destroying food, ammunition, equipment. The Ottomans are forced to detach large portions of their army to guard supply routes, reducing men available for the siege. Skanderbeg also attacks Ottoman foraging parties, making it dangerous to gather food from surrounding countries. As weeks turn into months, the besieging army begins to suffer from hunger and disease. Summer heat makes conditions in the Ottoman camp unbearable. Disease spreads through the crowded military encampment. Men begin dying not from Albanian weapons but from dysentery, typhoid, camp fevers. Morale of Ottoman troops who expected quick victory begins to crack. By October, the siege has lasted 5 months. The walls of Kruje still stand. Mehmed II, who's been directing the siege personally for part of this time, realizes that continuing will gain nothing. The Albanians have proven they can outlast the Ottoman army even when besieged. In late October, Mehmed orders the siege lifted. The Ottoman army withdraws, leaving behind their dead and much of their heavy equipment. It's a humiliating failure for the young Sultan. The successful defense of Kruje in 1450 is perhaps Skanderbeg's greatest. He's defended a fortress against an army 10 times larger, equipped with the most advanced siege technology of the age, commanded by a sultan who will go on to conquer Constantinople. The news spreads across Europe. Skanderbeg becomes an international celebrity, the Christian hero who stands alone against the Islamic tide. Poets write epics about him. Artists paint his portrait. Kings and popes send gifts and letters of congratulation. For a brief moment, it seems Skanderbeg might actually succeed in permanently liberating Albania from Ottoman control, but the rebellion is beginning to show strain. 25 years of near-constant fields lie untilled because men are fighting. Villages are burned, caught between Ottoman raids and Albanian reprisals. The population is declining from casualties and refugees fleeing to safer lands. The Albanian nobility, united in early years, begins to fracture under pressure. Some lords start negotiating secretly with the Ottomans, looking for ways to preserve. Skanderbeg himself is aging. He's in his mid-50s now, an old man by 15th century standards. Years of campaigning have taken their toll. He suffers from old wounds and chronic illnesses that come from a lifetime of war, but he can't stop. He is the heart of the rebellion. Without him, the whole structure will collapse. In 1453, Mehmed II captures Constantinople, an event that shocks Christian Europe to its core. The fall of the Byzantine Empire removes the last major Christian power in the Eastern Mediterranean. Mehmed can now turn his full attention to consolidating Ottoman control over the Balkans, and that means dealing with Skanderbeg. In 1454, Mehmed sends another army to Albania under Tahir Pasha with orders to bring Skanderbeg to battle and destroy him. The two armies meet near the town of Oranik in 1456, in a battle that will test Skanderbeg's skills one more time. The Battle of Oranik shows Skanderbeg at his most tactically sophisticated. He's positioned his army, about 15,000 men, on defensible high ground. But unlike earlier battles, this time he uses a feigned retreat to draw the Ottomans into a trap. The Ottoman army, numbering approximately 35,000, advances confidently, expecting the usual. Skanderbeg sends forward a small force of cavalry that engages the Ottoman vanguard and then appears to panic and flee. The Ottomans, thinking they've caught the Albanians out of position, pursue eagerly. Tahir Pasha orders a general advance. His army streams forward in pursuit of what they believe is a defeated enemy. The Albanian cavalry leads them on for miles, always staying just out of reach, drawing the Ottomans deeper into a valley where terrain becomes increasingly broken and difficult. When the Ottoman army is fully committed, strung out in a long, disorganized line of march, Skanderbeg springs his trap. The fleeing Albanian cavalry suddenly wheels and charges back into the pursuing Ottomans. At the same moment, Albanian forces hidden in hills on both sides of the valley attack the Ottoman flanks. The Ottomans find themselves caught in a killing zone, attacked from 3 directions, unable to form proper defensive lines in broken terrain. The fighting at Oranik is some of the most intense of the entire rebellion. The battle rages for hours as Ottomans desperately try to fight their way out of the trap. Tahir Pasha is killed early, shot from his horse by an Albanian marksman. With their commander dead, the Ottoman army begins to disintegrate. Units break and run, only to be cut down by Albanian cavalry. Others stand and fight with suicidal bravery, knowing there's no escape. By the time the sun sets, the valley is carpeted with Ottoman dead. Skanderbeg's army has won another stunning victory, but the cost to the Albanians is heavy too. They've lost perhaps 3,000 men, a significant portion of their total force. More importantly, there are no replacements. Every Albanian soldier who dies cannot be replaced, while the Ottomans can always raise new armies from their vast empire. Skanderbeg knows he's fighting a war he can't ultimately win. He needs a diplomatic solution, but none appears forthcoming. In the years following Oranik, the character of the war changes. The Ottomans stop sending massive armies to crush Skanderbeg in single decisive battles. Instead, they adopt a strategy of attrition. They send smaller forces to raid and occupy Albania, build fortifications, establish garrisons. They encourage local Albanian nobles to defect by offering titles, lands, protection. They attack Skanderbeg's supply lines and attempt to isolate him politically from European allies. This new approach is more difficult for Skanderbeg to counter. He can defeat large armies on the battlefield, but he can't be everywhere. His forces are stretched thin. The League of Lege, never fully unified, begins to fall apart as member lords make separate peace agreements with the Ottomans or simply withdraw support. Skanderbeg fights on, but it's clear that time is running out. He appeals again and again to European powers for substantial military aid. Not just money and supplies, but actual troops. The response is disappointing. Venice provides some help but is more interested in protecting its own coastal trading cities than defending inland Albania. The Papal States offer moral support and limited financial assistance. The Kingdom of Naples sends a small contingent of soldiers at one point, but not enough to change the strategic situation. Skanderbeg is essentially fighting alone. In 1466, Mehmed II decides to personally lead one final campaign to crush Skanderbeg. The Sultan assembles an army estimated at between 80,000 and 100,000, the largest force ever sent against Albania. Mehmed intends to besiege Kruje again, but this time he won't fail. The Ottoman army arrives at Kruje in April 1466 and begins what will be the second great siege of the fortress. Mehmed has brought his best siege engineers and the finest artillery in the Ottoman arsenal. He surrounds the fortress with a double ring of fortifications, establishing a complete blockade to prevent any supplies from reaching defenders. Inside Kruje, the garrison, commanded once again by Vrana Conti, prepares for a siege that everyone knows may be the last. They've stockpiled food and ammunition, prepared defensive positions for a long fight. Skanderbeg, now 61 years old and in failing health, is outside the siege lines with what remains of his field army, perhaps 6,000 men. He knows he can't break the siege through direct assault. Instead, he returns to the tactics that have served him for more than 20 years. Harassment, raids on supply lines, making the siege as costly as possible for the Ottomans. The second siege of Kruje lasts from April to September 1466. 5 brutal months of bombardment and assault. Mehmed's artillery pounds the walls day and night, creating The Ottomans launch assault after assault, sending wave after wave of troops against the walls. The fighting on the battlements is constant, a grinding battle of attrition where men die by the hundreds for every foot of wall space. The defenders are exhausted, hungry, running low on ammunition and supplies. Mehmed offers terms of surrender multiple times, promising to spare the garrison if they give up the fortress. Each time, Vrana Conti refuses. Outside the walls, Skanderbeg conducts a masterful campaign of mobile warfare. Despite his age, his cavalry appears from nowhere, strikes hard and vanishes back into the mountains before the Ottomans can respond. The Ottoman supply situation becomes critical. An army of 100,000 men requires enormous quantities of food, fodder, ammunition. Skanderbeg's raids disrupt the flow of supplies to the point where the besieging army begins to suffer serious shortages. Disease returns to the Ottoman camp. Dysentery, typhoid, plague sweeps through the ranks. Men are dying faster from disease than from Albanian weapons. By September, Mehmed II faces the same situation his father faced 16 years earlier. The siege is failing. The walls of Kruje, though battered, still stand. The defenders, though reduced to perhaps 1,000 effective fighters, haven't surrendered. Mehmed makes the decision to withdraw. On September 25th, the Ottoman army lifts the siege and begins the long march back to Constantinople. It's another humiliating failure, this time personally overseen by Skanderbeg has done the impossible. He's defeated Mehmed the Conqueror, the man who took Constantinople, the greatest military leader of his generation. The relief inside Kruje is overwhelming. The defenders have endured 5 months of hell and emerged victorious. Skanderbeg enters the fortress to scenes of jubilation, but he knows this isn't true. It's merely a reprieve. The Ottomans will be back, they always come back, and next time he may not be able to stop them. The siege takes its final toll on Skanderbeg's health. The constant campaigning, the stress, the years of warfare, the wounds old and new, they've broken his body. In the months following the siege, he falls seriously ill. The exact nature of his illness isn't recorded in detail, but it appears to be some form of fever, possibly malaria or another disease common in the region. Skanderbeg rallies briefly in early 1468, trying to organize defenses for what he knows will be another Ottoman offensive. But in January 1468, his condition deteriorates rapidly. He takes to his bed in the fortress of Lejje, surrounded by his closest companions and advisors. News of his illness spreads quickly through Albania and beyond. People who have followed his struggles for 25 years wait anxiously for news. He's 62 years old. The rebellion that he created, sustained and embodied, dies with him. His death marks the end of organized Albanian resistance to Ottoman conquest. Without Skanderbeg's military genius, without his ability to unite the fractious Albanian nobility, without his international, the rebellion cannot continue. Within months of Skanderbeg's death, the Ottoman armies return to Albania. This time, there's no brilliant general to oppose them. The Albanian nobles, who united under Skanderbeg out of respect for his leadership and fear of his military power, fragment back into Others fight on briefly but are crushed piecemeal. By 1479, 11 years after Skanderbeg's death, the Ottomans have completed the conquest of Albania. Kruje itself, the fortress that held out for so long, finally falls to the Ottomans in 1478 after a year-long siege. The garrison, with no hope of relief and no Skanderbeg to save them, the Ottomans, in a gesture that speaks to their respect and fear of Skanderbeg even in death, open his tomb and remove his body. According to some accounts, Ottoman soldiers take pieces of his bones as talismans, believing that the man who defeated so many of their armies must have possessed supernatural power. His armor and weapons are taken to Constantinople and put on display as war trophies. Albania becomes an Ottoman province and will remain under Ottoman control for more than 400 years. But if Skanderbeg's rebellion ultimately failed in its immediate goal of permanently liberating Albania, its impact on history extends far beyond the borders of that small mountain nation. Skanderbeg's resistance bought time for Christian Europe at a critical moment. During the 25 years that Skanderbeg held Ottoman armies in the Albanian mountains, those armies were not marching on Venice, Vienna, or Rome. Military historians have debated what might have happened if Skanderbeg had not forced the Ottomans to divert enormous resources to suppressing his rebellion. Would Mehmed II have been able to push deeper into Italy or Central Europe if he hadn't been constantly dealing with the Albanian problem? It's impossible to know for certain, but it's clear that Skanderbeg's rebellion disrupted Ottoman strategic planning for his success in defeating vastly larger Ottoman armies also provided a military template that other commanders would study and try to emulate. His use of terrain, his understanding of mobile warfare, his ability to avoid decisive battles when conditions were unfavorable and strike with devastating effect when they were favorable. All of these became part of the tactical repertoire of anti-Ottoman resistance fighters for generations to come. Skanderbeg's legend grew after his death rather than fading. In the 16th and 17th centuries, as Ottoman power reached its zenith and threatened to overwhelm Europe, Skanderbeg became a symbol. Books about his life and battles circulated widely. He appeared in poems, plays, histories. Protestant and Catholic Europe, normally at each other's throats, agreed on Skanderbeg as a hero. In Albania itself, during the centuries of Ottoman rule, Albanians kept the memory of Skanderbeg alive as a symbol of national identity and resistance to foreign domination. In the 19th century, as nationalist movements swept through the Balkans, Skanderbeg became the father of Albanian nationalism, the proof that Albania had once been free and could be free again. When Albania finally gained independence in 1912, Skanderbeg's image was everywhere. His double-headed eagle emblem became the national flag. Statues of him were erected in every major city. His story was taught to every schoolchild as the founding myth of the Albanian. The battles Skanderbeg fought, particularly Torvioll, Mokra, Oranik, and the two sieges of Kruje, are studied in military academies as examples of how a smaller mobile force can defeat a larger, more powerful enemy through superior tactics, knowledge of terrain, and unconventional warfare. Skanderbeg's Albanian forces, man for man, were no better armed or trained than other Balkan troops of the period. What made them effective was their commanders' ability to use them at the right place and time, to maintain their morale through years of hardship, and to inspire them to fight with a ferocity that consistently surprised and overwhelmed their enemies. Modern military theorists analyzing asymmetric warfare and insurgencies find in Skanderbeg's campaigns a historical precedent for many of the principles that guide such conflicts today. The yataghan, the traditional Albanian sword Skanderbeg's fighters wielded, became almost synonymous with the rebellion. This curved, single-edged blade, typically between 20, the slash and thrust fighting that characterized battles in mountainous terrain. Albanian warriors using the yataghan developed a fighting style that emphasized speed and aggression, closing rapidly with the enemy and relying on the weapon's curved blade to deliver slashing attacks that could penetrate chainmail and even some plate armor. The terrain of Albania was perhaps Skanderbeg's greatest weapon. Albania is a land of mountains, with peaks rising above 7,000 feet and countless valleys, gorges and passes that channel movement along predictable routes. This geography makes it extremely difficult for large armies to operate. The mountain passes, many barely wide enough for a single column of troops, create natural choke points perfect for ambushes. The broken terrain prevents effective deployment of cavalry in their shock role and limits the utility of artillery. Skanderbeg knew every valley, every pass, every place where water could, every defensive position. This knowledge, acquired during his childhood in Albania and reinforced through years of campaigning, allowed him to choose when and where to fight, and to avoid battle when conditions were unfavorable. The Ottomans, by contrast, were operating in unfamiliar territory. Ottoman commanders repeatedly led their armies into positions where they couldn't use their advantages in numbers and equipment, where they were vulnerable to attacks from multiple directions, where retreat was as dangerous as advancing. The psychological dimension of Skanderbeg's campaigns also contributed significantly to his success. The Albanian fighters were fighting for their families, their faith, their freedom. This gave them a moral and psychological edge that regular Ottoman troops, fighting far from home for pay and plunder, couldn't match. Skanderbeg cultivated this psychological advantage through his personal leadership style. He shared his soldiers' hardships, slept, ate the same food, fought in the front ranks of battle. This created intense loyalty among his troops. They would follow him into situations where numerical odds and logic suggested they should flee because they trusted his judgment and believed in his cause. The economic dimension of the rebellion also played a crucial role in its eventual outcome. Wars are extraordinarily expensive, and Skanderbeg was fighting on a shoestring budget. The Albanian economy was primarily agricultural, based on subsistence farming and herding. With limited trade and almost no manufacturing, the constant warfare disrupted even this limited economic activity. Fields went unplanted because farmers were... What little surplus wealth existed was consumed by the needs of war. Skanderbeg received some financial support from Venice, the Papal States, and the Kingdom of Naples, but this was irregular and never sufficient to maintain a standing army. He relied heavily on captured Ottoman equipment to arm and supply his forces. After major victories like Torvioll and Mokra, his men would strip the battlefield of weapons, armor, horses, supplies. This worked as long as he kept winning. But any significant defeat would have been catastrophic because he had no reserves to draw on. The Ottomans, by contrast, had the resources of a vast empire. They could afford to lose armies and raise new ones. They could manufacture weapons and equipment on a scale that Albania couldn't match. The economic imbalance meant that time was always on the Ottoman side. Every year the war continued was a year that drained Albania's limited resources while the Ottomans could sustain their efforts almost indefinitely. The question of whether Skanderbeg was a hero or a tragedy for Albania depends on perspective and time frame. In the short term, his rebellion brought enormous suffering to Albania. The country was devastated by decades of warfare. The population declined. When the Ottomans finally conquered Albania, they imposed harsh measures that made the subsequent centuries of Ottoman rule more oppressive than they might otherwise have been. One could argue that if the Albanian nobles had simply accepted Ottoman rule peacefully in the 1440s, they might have preserved more autonomy and avoided the destruction that the rebellion brought. But from a longer historical perspective, Skanderbeg's rebellion established Albania as a distinct nation with its own identity and history of resistance to foreign rule. Without Skanderbeg, Albania might have been absorbed into the Ottoman Empire so thoroughly that it lost its separate... The memory of Skanderbeg kept alive the idea of Albanian nationhood through 4 centuries of Ottoman rule. When the opportunity for independence finally came in the early 20th century, Albanians had a historical foundation on which to build a national identity. In that sense, Skanderbeg's rebellion, though it failed militarily, succeeded in preserving something essential about Albania. The personal story of Skanderbeg, beyond the battles and political maneuvering, is a tale of profound transformation and divided loyalty. He was taken from his family as a child, raised in the faith and culture of his enemies, trained to be their weapon. For 20 years he served the Ottoman Empire loyally and with distinction. What changed? What made him risk everything to return to a land and a people he barely remembered? The sources don't give us a clear answer. Perhaps it was always his plan, a long game played across decades, waiting for the right moment. Perhaps it was a gradual reawakening of old loyalties, sparked by meetings with other Albanians in Ottoman service, by news from home, by the slow accumulation of small injustices and humiliations. Perhaps it was a moment of crisis, a sudden realization during the chaos of the Battle of Nias that he couldn't continue serving the empire that had taken everything from him. We'll never know for certain what went through Skanderbeg's mind in those crucial moments when he made his choice. What we do know is that once he made that choice, he never wavered from it. For the remaining 25 years of his life, he dedicated every resource, every talent, every ounce of his considerable abilities to fighting the empire that raised him. The battles that Skanderbeg fought were brutal, personal affairs where men hacked at each other with swords and axes. where death came from a spear thrust or a crossbow bolt fired at close range, where commanders fought in the front ranks and could be killed as easily as any common soldier. This wasn't the sanitized, distant warfare of later centuries. Skanderbeg led cavalry charges personally, wielding his sword against enemy soldiers, putting his body at risk in every major engagement. Contemporary accounts describe him as a tall and strong, with exceptional endurance and skill with weapons. He was wounded multiple times over his career, but never seriously enough to keep him from the field for long. His willingness to share danger with his men, to fight alongside them rather than behind them, created a bond that transcended the normal relationships between medieval commanders and their troops. His soldiers knew that Skanderbeg would never ask them to do something he wouldn't do himself. This trust was essential to his success. It allowed him to demand extraordinary efforts from his troops, to lead them into battles where they were outnumbered 3 or 4 to 1, and to have them follow him without question. Skanderbeg married Gjergj Kastrioti in 1451. The marriage was partly political, cementing alliances among Albanian noble families. But contemporary accounts suggest genuine affection between them. Gjergj is recorded as having been involved in defending fortresses when Skanderbeg was in the field, suggesting she was not merely a decorative consort. They had one son, Gjergj Kastrioti II, born around 1454. Skanderbeg's concern for his son's future must have weighed on him as the rebellion continued year after year with no clear path to victory. After Skanderbeg's death, Gjergj and John fled to Italy to escape Ottoman vengeance. Living under the protection of the Kingdom of Naples, John grew up in exile, never seeing his father's homeland, carrying the name of Albania's greatest hero but unable to reclaim his inheritance. The line of Kastrioti died out within a few generations, but by then the name Skanderbeg belonged to legend rather than to any living family. The final years of Skanderbeg's life, from 1466 to 1468, show a man increasingly aware that his rebellion would not achieve its ultimate goal of permanently liberating Albania. The successful defense of Kruje in 1466 was a military triumph, but changed nothing strategically. And Skanderbeg would have to fight the same battles again. He could win every battle and still lose the war through simple attrition. His European allies had proven unreliable, his own Albanian nobles were wavering, his health was failing. Despite all this, he didn't surrender or seek a negotiated peace. He could have. The Ottomans would certainly have offered him terms if he'd been willing to submit. Mehmed II, who respected military ability, might well have restored Skanderbeg to a position of authority under Ottoman rule if it meant ending the rebellion without further bloodshed. But Skanderbeg never seriously considered this option. Having made his choice in 1443, he would see it through to the end. This determination, this refusal to compromise or surrender even when the cause seemed hopeless, is perhaps Skanderbeg's most defining characteristic, and the reason his legend has endured. In conclusion, Gjergj Kastrioti Skanderbeg was one of the most remarkable military commanders of the 15th. His career spanned a quarter century of nearly continuous warfare against the most powerful empire of his age. He won far more battles than he lost, defended his homeland against repeated invasions by vastly superior forces, and became an international symbol of Christian resistance to Ottoman expansion. His tactical innovations, particularly his use of terrain and mobile warfare to offset numerical inferiority, influenced military thinking for generations. His rebellion, though ultimately unsuccessful in permanently liberating Albania, delayed Ottoman conquest, imposed significant costs on the Ottoman Empire, and preserved Albania. A shrewd politician and a determined leader who refused to surrender even when victory seemed impossible. The legendary Skanderbeg became something more, a symbol of resistance, an embodiment of national identity, a hero whose story transcended the specific historical circumstances of his life to speak to universal human desire. Whether you focus on the historical man or the cultural legend, Skanderbeg remains a figure of enduring significance. His life and achievements continue to fascinate and inspire more than 5 centuries after his death. He proved that courage, leadership, and tactical brilliance can allow even the smallest force to stand against the mightiest empire. and that sometimes the greatest victories aren't measured in territory won or enemies defeated, but in the spirit of resistance that refuses to die.